Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day one of Advertising Week 10. And it's a great pleasure to, and a privilege to be able to introduce this session that, includes so many, dear friends of myself and Matt and Advertising Week in general. And I would be remiss not to thank our chairman of Advertising Week, Matt Freeman. We work year-round with Matt, and he's, really challenged us to build the thought leadership program. But I don't want to play any more favoritism, but without further ado, Betty Liu, anchor for Bloomberg Television.
Thank you very much, Lance. And Peter, I noticed you brought along your Angry Birds fans here in the audience.
Of course, always.
So we know we'll get the support. Thank you so much to Advertising Week for hosting us in this panel. And I think this is going to be we were spending about 30 minutes backstage and already had some great conversations going about leadership, about branding, and communicating that to the wider world. I thought instead of me introducing everyone and reading their bios, I thought it would be much better if each of our panelists introduced themselves and said one thing about what drove them into the business. So I want to turn it over, and just, if you can keep it to about a minute or so, that would be great. And we can then move on to the conversation at hand. But Matt, do you want to start off with that?
Sure. I'm Matt Freeman. I'm a partner with Bain Capital. But prior to that, spent a long time in the agency world. And I guess what drove me into advertising, my wife and I were English teachers, and we were both broke, and she wanted to go to graduate school. She basically said, I'm going to save the world, and you've got to go out and pay for it. That's what drove me into it. Purely accidental.
A good reason.
Yeah.
Luca?
I'm Luca Lindner. I'm work with MCCANN. As you can perceive by my accent, I'm very Italian. Very Italian. And the one reason why I got into this business is it was the only job I was offered when I left school, so there was not much more choice.
I'm Susan Lyne. I'm the CEO of the AOL Brand Group, and I've spent 3.5 decades in various media companies and media industries. I started in the magazine business, then went to ABC and Disney for about a decade, then the Martha Stewart Company, then segued into a commerce company for a short period of time, Gilt Group, and I joined the management team at AOL about 6 months ago. And what drove me into the business, and I won't say this business because it's not, I've been on the content side forever, and certainly advertising has been a critical part of most of the companies I've been part of. But what drove me to magazines initially was it was where the conversation was. If I was graduating from school now, it would probably be digital. But at the time, if you wanted to be in a creative business where you were really monitoring and changing the way people thought, you went into magazines.
I'm Nigel Morris. I run Aegis Media and Dentsu Aegis for the Americas and for EMEA. And I completely stumbled into the industry because I worked for the first 8 years after leaving college. I actually worked in fashion and in the textile industry. And I was actually doing a talk about change because the industry was undergoing a lot of change, believe it or not, and a lot to do with technology. And a guy called Nick Bryan came up after the talk and said, "We've just started a small little agency. Would you like to come and talk to us?" So I went and talked to him and Jerry Bullman, and somehow I'm still here.
I'm Kathleen Saxton. I'm the CEO of the Lighthouse company. We're an executive search firm who specialise in finding CEOs and leaders for businesses around the globe. I wanted to be a dentist when I was a child, and I wasn't bright enough to be a dentist. But I ended up becoming a secretary for what became a Dragon's Den dragon. I think we have Dragon's Den over here. Theo Profitas. I was his secretary, and I worked my way up from there. That's my story.
You do have very nice teeth, though.
Thank you very much. It cost me a fortune.
Very
Very good, very good. Yes, I'm Peter. I'm the Mighty Eagle and CMO at Rovio, better known for Angry Birds, as you can probably tell. Yeah, I've been always focusing on doing kind of like cool new stuff. So that's kind of like in all my jobs. So before Rovio, I did a few years at HP, so kind of like know what like big corporate life can be like as well. And then some startups and now Rovio. And yeah, I think that it's always been about doing crazy ambitious stuff, and still believe that we can change the world. So that's kind of like what keeps me going and the team at Rovio going. So, you know, crazy big stuff.
All right, great. So you all know the panelists now, and I'm going to ask each of you a question tailored to you, but feel free to jump in during this panel. I like to get conversations going, and then we're going to open it up for questions. But Matt, let me toss out the first question to you, because we were talking about this backstage as well. I mean, you'd spent so many years on the agency side, and now you've been 18 months at Bain Capital, is that right?
That's right.
So how has that changed for you, particularly leadership? How has that changed going from the agency side to now you're at Bain Capital, of all places?
That is true. I'm aware of that. So I think, you know, we were talking about this backstage a little bit, and he was asking if I miss the agency world. The truth is that you know, I'm lucky enough still to get to do a lot of the agency activities, but now the relationship with the marketer is much different. We are, you know, we own the companies, and I'm personally an investor in the companies, and so there's an alignment of interests that takes away a lot of the conflict that you sometimes feel in the agency world, and
what was
it
the
lets
conflict?
Well, I mean, you know, I think the professional service model is kind of tough in today's age, where essentially it incentivizes you to take longer to solve problems. And so in a fee-for-service model, there's an inherent conflict to agency-client relationships. It can be a positive tension, it can be a negative tension, but it's not necessarily 100% aligned. And the thought is, if you put capital behind the marketing improvement, there's a clarity, there's you know, purity to the alignment that's made you know, a lot more fun, actually, to focus on the work and the growth.
Now, Luca, I know you're part of a three-way chairmanship role at MCCANN. Tell me how that works exactly.
It doesn't. No,
So subtle.
You're all fighting, right?
No, it works well. It works well because Harris Diamond is clearly the leader, so he's in that job. And Gustavo Martinez and myself, we split the geographies, so he's in charge of Europe and Asia. I'm in charge of North America, South America, Middle East, and Africa. And then we split the responsibility on our global clients. In this way, there is a more direct relationship with the geographies and the markets, and it works pretty well. And in terms of our internal dynamic, we speak for 2 hours every week on a phone call, and we meet for a full day every month. And we look to both strategy and tactical matters. So far it's working pretty well. Pretty well.
But you have to say that, though, right?
Yeah. Is there a camera?
Susan, you've been in so many different areas, like you said, in content. But you know, you've gone from being at the Disney company, head of ABC Entertainment, to heading Martha Stewart, you know, living on to that media empire, and then now you're here at AOL, which it's a turnaround story. So how has leadership changed for you going from company to company like that?
You know, I think that that what I see most is just the increasing speed demanded around decision making. You know, I used to think that it was the difference between a startup. Certainly when I went to Gilt, we were a tiny company, and so keeping up with the growth demanded a different kind of development cycle. But what I've realized coming now back into a large company after 4 years at a startup, or what was a startup, is that the whole world has changed their development cycles, so that even large companies many large companies, certainly large companies that operate in this digital world, you need to make decisions faster. You need to push product out faster. It's just an increasingly accelerated landscape.
But then how do you know the decisions you're making, it opens you up to more mistakes, does it not?
I think that's always the case, although hopefully you get into a cycle of being able to test and learn and to push more investment to the things that are actually working and where you're seeing good results, and then pulling back on things that aren't. But there's not the same deliberate nature that I saw certainly when I was at Disney. And before Disney, I was at News Corp for years. And that world has changed. There's just no question about it.
Changing all the time and increasingly and faster and faster.
Yeah.
Nigel, tell me a little bit. I mean, you work a lot with big brands around the world. You talk about communicating the brands to the larger public. Tell me what you do.
No, there's the thing. Can I, before I do that, can I just follow on from what Susan said, because it's relevant as well, which is that cycle of speeding up and moving to nearer and nearer to real time is probably the biggest leadership challenge that we all face. And you sort of said, how do you stop making mistakes? One of the things that I think is most important is, and I was told this years and years ago, was 1 hour spent thinking about something is worth 10 hours doing it. And creating space to actually think is actually one of the most really important and cherished things that we should do, because especially on a global basis, and sort of segue into, so I run a group of companies, densely Aegis, across EMEA, across Americas, so that's, both sides, it's whatever it is, 73 countries, 30,000 people, and it's difficult because everything's in near real time. We get about 500 emails a day. Everyone wants an answer immediately. You're trying to do the strategic things, and at the same time, you're trying to service, whether it's General Motors globally, whether it's Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, whatever, and you've got to be in multiple places. It's very easy to actually get sucked into the detail. Whereas a critical thing, I think, as a leader, when you have those complex organizations, always, as soon as it's global, you're in a matrix, is to understand how to influence without control. And so clarity of thinking, creating some space to actually be able to think, and then actually being able to manage through influence is a critical thing.
Kathleen, I know you talk to C-suite executives all around the world, and you've seen leadership changes develop right under your eyes. Tell me what's been the most significant change that you've noticed in the last 10 years?
I think some of the top executives have had to make a decision about, are they going to stay curious? Do they still have the energy and the drive to keep assimilating all the changes that are coming, particularly with technology and the pace, and I think understanding how to translate that for their clients. And what I've found, both sides of the Atlantic actually, is that there are certain individuals that may have been a CEO for quite some time who have enjoyed quite an ambassadorial role to some degree. And actually, I kind of think to some of that, those days are over. And I think, to Nigel's point, you can't get so knee-deep in the kind of detail that you can't have a perspective. But you absolutely have to roll your sleeves up and get involved with the business and be thinking again about how you can make your processes and how you can make your people all focused in the right direction. Because the disruption, and someone talked about eruption today on a different panel, the pace of everything is so great. We've been talking about that for years. But as a leader, are you going to engage and lean into that? Or are you going to say, do you know what, I really enjoyed my time, but I think it's time to go and do something else?
All right, and Peter, just a question for you would be, I mean, you've seen your company grow from this little startup in Finland to now a multi-billion-dollar company where you're looking...
We're still tiny, I mean, so still view ourselves as a startup, only getting started.
Well, how has that changed for you though? Because you're suddenly managing a lot more under your belt than you were, back in what was it, 2003 when you started the company?
Yeah, the company was started in 2003, but then things really kind of like took off with Angry Birds, and that's only like a bit over 3 years, so end of 2009. So it's happened very fast, and I think one of the kind of like challenges is that when you go from like 12 people to 750 that we're right now, and I mean even if you look at kind of like beginning of last year we're 200, so we kind of like added a few people, and I think that we've gotten really good at bringing kind of like new people, new talent on board. So you kind of like you learn, and then I think. The good thing about growth is that when you're growing, then you don't have time to worry about kind of like all the little problems. You need to worry about kind of like the big challenges. So let's say in some respects it makes things easier. That you just have to kind of like focus on getting stuff done, and you have to focus on making sure that you are doing big enough things fast enough all the time, kind of like to keep.
So it's easier for you as the company gets bigger. It's actually easier for you to manage.
I wouldn't say that it's easier, but I think kind of like the growth has made things easier. And then of course, we'll see. I mean, as I said, it's early days, but I think that it's very important if you look at kind of from a leadership perspective that need to make sure that people have. I mean, you need to have leadership at all levels. So it's not just like the top, you have to have that like everywhere, and people have then the courage to go do things. And you brought up like mistakes. I mean, of course we all make mistakes, and then like we learn from those and we move on. And I think that's another thing that you have to encourage people to be curious, do new things, but then you also should have kind of like the courage to get it done, and you shouldn't be afraid of like failing, because that will happen. It's just kind of like part of doing things. And I think here on like the speed, I think the worst thing is not to do things, and that's something that that's like scary.
Can I build on that? Because I believe that particularly in our line of business, which as we always say is a people business, the CEO job or the leader's job is mostly a HR job. I mean, we don't really manage massive capitals. We don't have production line. The financial side of our business is pretty simple. The only real thing that the leader has to do is to choose the right people, cast the right people, make them work in the right environment, solve conflict, challenge them, remunerate them, make them happy, and if they're not happy, let them go. But it's mostly, I would say today, in our line of business, a HR job, the job of a leader. It's not much more than that.
The way you described those, is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's fantastic because it's you get the only real capital you have, which is people, and you make this capital grow. So you help people to grow. In the meantime, you grow the business, and you grow yourself as a person because you're constantly challenged by different people with different background, different nationalities, different gender, different everything. So I think it's a very challenging and interesting job. It's that job only, basically, or mostly.
Would you all agree with that?
I think that there's one thing that I would add to that, which is great organisations and therefore, if you like, leaders need two things. And the leader needs a compass, which is, in effect, its vision and your vision. So being able to set an absolutely clear view of where the organisation's going. Because, of course, in the end, if no one knows where they're going, no one can follow you. And the other thing that you need is a radar, which is, again, to really understand, right, okay, we're going over there, but to understand where the rocks are, how to avoid the rocks. But you do need both. Politicians, of which you probably interview lots, tend to have a great radar, and so they're avoiding things and they find themselves over there, but they really want to go over here. So really being able to set that vision, I think, is a really important part, being able to communicate that vision. And then it is about, if you like, being the talent manager, putting the right team in place to be able to achieve that vision. And the one thing, I'd say is it's a big motivational job. is actually empowering people. And a lot of that is transparency. A lot of that is being really open with people. A lot of that is about building a meritocracy so that people feel empowered. Because then, then people will do things. Because it can't be centralised. You have to open up and get the right people actually doing those things.
But I think the compass piece is actually, it shouldn't be, but it is often very challenging. And I think that there are many people that just lack some of the courage, actually, to really believe in their convictions. And I think I often have a saying with people, which is, if your salary didn't matter, what would you do? And do that. Because actually, if you don't have a fear of what could happen, but you have a very strong vision, people will want to get behind that. And I think that authenticity of, this is what I really believe our business should be doing and why, as Nigel says, people will organise themselves behind that and go with that if they truly believe that you as the leader of that business can give them that vision and that sense of purpose. I do unfortunately find some organisations where we're asked to put in, let's say, a regional CEO, and actually the global CEO is lacking some of that confidence. And therefore, their decisions around who they do and don't choose to do that, maybe that regional role, is actually a reflection on their own self-confidence or self-purpose. And that can be very tricky, because often I start worrying then about the health of that organisation. And as an outsider, I have the luxury of the perspective of being able to see that when maybe they can't.
I think that is actually a brilliant point. And yeah. I finish every talk internally, there's a couple of people here with this image which I found a few years ago of this little boy at the top of a very steep hill down towards wharf and water, and he's on a skateboard. And he's there, and he's basically what he's thinking about is, isn't this going to be amazing? Isn't this going to be, it's going to be scary, but it's going to be amazing. If you're worried about falling off, if you don't have the bravery, if you're thinking about yourself, then you're not going to succeed in this world. You have to cast that off, and you really have to back your own conviction that I am going to make it. I believe in what I'm going to do.
Right.
And the bravery to actually go and do it.
So would you say that is would you all agree that that is the hardest part of leadership, is having that vision and having that sort of long-term goal and sticking with it? Is that the hardest part of leadership? Yeah?
I think developing a vision is, absolutely. I think that's the key, right? Making sure that you have a clearly defined end state that you are driving everybody towards, and doesn't mean that it doesn't shift a little bit over time as you see where the world is going, but expressing it constantly, because that's another thing that I think is often a major failure for leaders. You think that you've expressed it because you said it once at an annual meeting, and
everybody buys into it and remembers
in fact,
it.
You have to be on it. You can't say it often enough.
You have to live it. You have to live it, don't you?
Yeah,
you have to embody it.
That brings me to, I'm sure, a question that many people in the audience have, which is, what have been some of your biggest mistakes as leaders, and what did you learn from that? Would you like to take a stab at that?
Sure. I became a CEO at a really young age. I'm probably not qualified today, but back then I was really not qualified. And I'll never forget the guy that made me take the job said, "The Lord loves an unwilling ruler." And I never forgot that. And I think a lot of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career are promoting people that wanted to be rulers as opposed to people that were rulers or leaders. And, it's a little simplistic to say, but in many ways, the talent has broken down into two groups: those that crave the power and those that wear it lightly and really are following a vision. And most of my biggest mistakes have been promoting people that crave the power.
Is it because it's hard to tell? Is it hard to
It's not always immediately apparent, but in retrospect, those have been my biggest mistakes.
Would anybody else like to volunteer a mistake they've made?
I was about to pick up on the point that Matt made, which is, I think there's also what I call bricklayers and architects. There are people in organisations who are fantastic bricklayers, And my sense is that you should pay them lots of money to be brilliant at doing that. What often happens is, after a number of years, those bricklayers want to get promoted to become architects, but they're not actually very good architects, and so your buildings become not very nice to look at. Very simplistic analogy, but I think it's often the case. And sometimes in interviewing, I ask people, do you think you're a great managing director or a great CEO or SVP or whatever the translation may be? And the people that don't really understand that question, when I ask them that question, they kind of feel they're one and the same thing, I worry about, because I do think that there are certain types of people who are naturally born to lead other human beings. We like to be led as human beings. And there are others that are great at just organising organisations instead. There's a very different skill. Just wanted to pick up on that.
I'd just like to say, I'd actually agree with both of you, because I think that, and just to build on Matt's point, where I've made that mistake before is always listening to my head and not my heart and my gut. So I'd say that all the mistakes, many of the mistakes that I've made have been because I've made a rational decision, whereas actually in there, I know it's wrong. I know, especially in relation to people. And then again, I do actually think that I use a different analogy, which is I call it the salesman syndrome. Is what happens is you have your best salesman who's absolutely brilliant, and you see it time and again, and they reach the pinnacle of where they can go, and then they want to be the sales manager, and you make them the sales manager, and of course what made them a brilliant salesman makes them a terrible sales manager. And actually you get a double hit, because you lose your best person there and you get another one who completely cocks it up because he can only do it his way. That's again the secret of management.
Well, can you give an example of when you used your head and you didn't follow your gut?
Yeah, actually, when I
names.
Pardon? Names are good. Actually, when I first came here, I made a lot of, and we were in a turnaround situation here, and a lot of people said, "Oh, you might get that bit right, but you're going to fail overall." And we've done remarkably well, but we would have been even faster where around one role, which was actually the CFO, and I said, literally when I came in, right, and he was a really nice guy, but he had to go. And then, people talk, well, you need someone who really understands, and it took 18 months later, I made the same decision that I would have done 18 months before, and I lost 18 months in that area.
Can I add? I think in a global organization, one of the biggest potential mistakes, and I went through this, is to consider that people around the world, they are the same. It belongs to the category of people who speak more or less English, they read Time magazine, and they go skiing. And actually, to do business with somebody from Dubai, or somebody from Rio de Janeiro, and somebody from Minneapolis, it's very different. I mean, the cultural differences today are still bigger than the cultural commonalities in the people who work with us or with any global company. So I think one possible mistake is to be in something between superficial and imperial, and think that everybody think and the value, the ambition, the needs, the fears are the same. Is not.
Well, and when you say that, you're talking really mostly about a Western, the Western imposition on other countries, right? The Western culture on other companies is what you're really talking about.
Yes,
Luca only hires Italians. Let's just put it on the table.
Yeah, from Italy. Now, I would say it's not just West, East. It's North and South. Mm-hmm. Even in Europe, the North Protestant world is very different than the Southern Catholic world. So I think the complication and the complexities are not just one, but it's a multiple complexity we have to deal with, and it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking that everybody is the same.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Susan?
I want to talk about a different kind of mistake. When I was at the Martha Stewart Company, I knew that the world was changing. I knew that we were moving from a magazine-dominated world to a digital world. And even with that, I had no understanding of how fast this was going to take place, and I underinvested in digital. There's just no question. I actually launched another magazine during my time there, and magazine launches are expensive. I mean, they are many millions of dollars. And I put X amount into digital, which I thought would get us to here. And I wasn't looking far enough out into the horizon. I was not as aware as I should have been of the shifts in consumer behavior. And it was a,
and you
it was a significant mistake. Yeah. I think those are the kinds of things that are almost hardest when you are in a legacy business and you see the world beginning to shift, and yet everybody who is at that company is in love with the legacy business. That's why they joined. And to push the company towards something that they may not be ready for is hard, but critically important, especially now. I mean, literally, I think there are very few businesses in this world that are not being impacted profoundly, whether they know it or not, by the shift in consumer behavior. I look at my two 20-something daughters and the way they consume media, the way that they shop, the way that they get information, the way that they, do literally everything. And it is completely different than people 20 years older. And that millennial tidal wave is going to really take a leadership role soon. It's a big swath of the population. And it is going to really have sea change impact on a lot of businesses, a lot of industries.
Well, Peter, I mean,
but I would just repeat the kind of importance of making mistakes, because then you're making decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that we make lots of mistakes all the time, but I think that what is very, very important that we actually learn from the mistakes. Yeah. I mean, when we kind of move from digital physical, and the first physical product that we did was actually our plush toys that now sold tens of millions. But what we totally kind of failed to do was kind of know what kind of demand we would have. So then we launched them I think it was November, and of course everybody wanted those for Christmas, and we ordered a lot, what we thought was a lot, and we ran out in a week. And then it took us until March the following year to kind of reply to all the angry emails and messages and Facebook, Twitter, you name it, that, hey, I ordered 2 red birds for my kids for Christmas. Where are they? And then, you can't make those out of thin air. But then what I think was really, really good is how we kind of then dealt with that, and we built up amazing customer support. We replied to every email, every tweet, everything. So now we have, really, really good customer support, and we get lots of feedback that, hey, you guys make apps that are free or 99 cents, and you have customer support. How can you do that? And I mean, how can we afford not to? But we learn from our mistake. And I think, again, I'd love for all of our people to make lots and lots of mistakes if we learn from those, because then we're doing stuff. Worst thing is if we're not doing anything, we're not moving fast enough. So it's all about learning every day.
Well, many of you have either started your own companies, or you've managed startups, or you've invested in them. Is it sometimes easier when you're in a startup and you're growing really fast and you're growing like gangbusters to cover up some of those mistakes? Is that often easier to do? And I mean, you would have obviously know firsthand.
Actually, so one thing I think that is kind of okay, it's good to grow. And all of that, but then I think that also when you're doing kind of really, really well, you don't necessarily always understand why. So kind of you get away with not doing an amazing job because you're doing great anyway. And I think that's something that you need to be very, very careful with that. You have to understand why you're doing well, and you might have some areas that are doing absolutely crap job, but you don't know because it looks good and you're delivering the numbers and all that. So I think that yeah, again, you have to kind of like learn, and you have to be careful with some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think your exponential growth in a startup is so like that, as you say, you wouldn't really know the bits you're getting wrong. You have to rely on your network around you to give you the feedback to say, listen, there's things you're falling down on, or the things you originally set it up for, you've kind of slightly lost your sheen on, and you need to kind of come back to basics. The positive, however, I think in a startup is you have the right to change your mind, and change your mind very quickly. So if you want to suddenly do a right-hand turn because something's come along opportunistically, or you feel that actually one of your original sets of values or visions is not quite right, you can move quickly. And in some bigger organisations, you can't. You've got to wait for the next board meeting or the next committee meeting, and it would drive some people mad, hence we leave and set up our own companies. Nigel, I think, does it a different way at Aegis, but...
Well, actually, I was just building off that. There's a really important thing, as you and just to take you as a very practical example. And I was, going from 15 people to 200 to 750. The critical thing is that's powered by growth, that exponential growth. That as you start to really start build out, there is a big difference between growth and scaling. Yeah. So the issue is, how do you take that growth and how do you scale your organisation so that you can carry on? Because if you don't put in place the infrastructure in the organisation to be able to support that growth, I mean, it's like, humans don't scale. Physically, we do not scale. And if you get to 8 feet tall, you fall over. You're literally, your skeleton, your body, your organs cannot support physically. And organisations are just like that, because organisations at the end are living entities. We need to understand that. So there is that transition from startup to scalable organisation. Again, is another. It's partly a technical management issue, but partly it's also it's a real test of leadership to actually transition, so you keep the spirit of your company, but actually enable that company to grow and support the growth.
Now, many of you, I mean, some of you have touched upon this already. I know, Luca, you did particularly, but the idea of managing talent and hiring the right people, having the right management team around you, having the right advisors, what's the biggest challenge in trying to put that team together and trying to make sure that you get the right talent that's out there?
I think the biggest challenge is casting, because we can identify a lot of very smart people who are very smart on their own, but they cast them together in the wrong way, and then you don't have a team. So to identify a talent is relatively easy today. Cast in the right way with the rest of the organization, and to cast his culture with the company culture, that's a difficult job.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that? On finding the right talent?
I think the alchemy point is a really important point, because in the end, we're teams, and the last thing we want is a series of individuals. I think that, again, partly it's identifying the right diversity and mix of talent. That's the critical point.
Why is that so difficult, though? Tell me, why is the alchemy so difficult? Why is it?
Because, well, there's a fundamental thing. This may come down to some of the other points about the leaders and the mistakes that Matt was talking about, which is everyone is drawn to homophily. Everyone's drawn to, I recognise that person because they're a bit like me. We've grown up as, this is a big failure in startups where, hey, there's 4 guys, they're all the same, they start the business, and they hire loads of people like them. But it's absolutely scientifically proven. If you have 4 people in a room and they're all the same, if you add another one, the incremental intelligence of that group goes up infinitesimally. Right? But they're easy to integrate. Everyone feels they're making the right decision. Hey, yeah, because we all agree. Whereas bringing somebody in who is different, who is a catalyst, heaven forbid it's a woman or something like that, is actually...
More than one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is, but people are scared of that. But actually, it's harder to integrate those people in. But the collective intelligence goes up exponentially. Yeah. So actually bringing in and breaking those boardroom ceilings is absolutely critical, again, as you grow. And trying to bring in different kinds of people who cause some dynamic tension, is some people just don't get it.
Often at the Lighthouse, we talk about the body rejecting the organ. So, if you're going to put one big individual in, what's going to happen to the body? And what's quite fascinating is some of the technology businesses like Twitter and Facebook that we work with often use consensual interviewing. So maybe 6 or 7 people will get to meet an individual, even if they're more senior than them, just to kind of get a view. That works in lots of ways because you get lots of perspectives, but equally, if the collective decide they're slightly strange, slightly odd, not like us, you can find they may reject people time and time again who could have been brilliant for the organisation. Mm-hmm. The flip side of that is if just one person's interviewing them and it's the CEO, there is a risk that they're hiring their own image. So you've got that's why sometimes a search firm can be helpful, or just other perspective mentors to kind of help you with that choice. But I agree with you that the collective has to be stronger than just a whole set of the sort of same types of people always. It's hard though. It is hard to do.
I think there's also a difference. There are people who can be hugely valuable individual contributors, but who are not great with a team. And understanding what they can do and where you put them so that they can actually add value is really important. And I would bet everybody on this panel has at some point hired someone who was toxic. And the damage that one person can do is stunning. So, yes, God bless the search firms who can stop us from doing that.
Do my best, Susan.
The other thing that I look for in middle management, in the people who I think will ultimately grow into being great leaders, are the people who can get other team members to work with them even though they are not reporting to them. Mm-hmm. So someone who can engage 1, 5, 15 people in a project that they're not going to get credit for, but because that person is willing to either trade things over time so that they make sure the other people on that team are rewarded, or they are just charismatic enough to really get people to want to work with them. Those are the people who I see becoming the great future leaders, the ones who can assemble a team, get people to work with them, even though they don't report to them.
Now, we've got a few minutes left on this panel, but I know, Peter, before I toss it out for questions for the audience, you look like you wanted to contribute to that.
Just agree like 100% on diversity thing. And then one thing that I think also would add, and it's been kind of like very interesting if you look at kind of like the Rovio program, we've been going through a lot of these kind of like steps very, very fast. And one thing that you of course you have to have top talent in like every position, but then that top talent kind of like the skills required change pretty fast. So somebody is good at building the organization from say to 0 to 50 or particular team is maybe not kind of like the best person to take it kind of like to the next level and really make sure that you can scale stuff. So I think that you just have to be very good at then identifying what people can actually do, and then they're not always kind of like there forever, which is also fine. So I think that it's just been very interesting for us to kind of like see that happening in very, very short time.
I want to throw it out to the audience if anyone has any questions. Yes, sir. Could you just stand up and say your name? And
Thanks. My name is Jason Aquino, and my question was, when your decision-making cycles get particularly fast or when they get particularly stressful, what are some of the, I guess, maybe personal rituals you guys have to make sure you make the best, most creative decisions you can? You know, for example, are you having meetings constantly, or are you retreating into seclusion, or are you sleeping, are you not sleeping, are you drinking? What's going on?
So my advice is always, if you can, is to sleep on it. I do think there is an absolute psychological value in sleeping on a decision that you're stressed with. However, to Nigel's earlier point, I think that your gut is a very, very good compass for what you think you should do. And if I have to make a decision quickly, I will imagine literally a gun to my head, what would I do? And my gut will normally tell me what the answer is, even if it's a difficult path. That'll be my ultimate test to myself, is the kind of gun to the head. But if you have the luxury of sleeping on it, it's amazing what happens when you wake up in the morning. The answer is there.
Yeah.
I would suggest one thing before going to sleep. I would also go to sleep, but before doing that, I would probably bounce very rapidly the issue and the possible decision with the team I trust the most. Can be 15 minutes, but to take such decision alone, it tends to increase the risk of a mistake compared to the possibility of bouncing your idea and your possible solution with your team.
Is your team necessarily the people who directly report to you, or do you have a much
Actually,
diverse?
very often are peers or people in other bits of the organization, people who are not too close to the issue, but they have experience and knowledge that they can share with me.
Yeah, I think taking a lateral perspective is also really important. It's actually step outside the if like the core of that particular decision, and actually look at it from 3 or 4 different angles. And I think that's and sleep on it and have that time to think. I mean, I go for a run, and it just helps because it actually allows the brain to just think in a different way.
So it's interesting. You're not really talking about gathering more data, gathering more research. You're really talking about taking a break in order to make the right decision. That's interesting. I mean, all of you are essentially saying that.
Usually what happens is you're given a look. You have the data. But actually, the data is actually not that. It's useful. But again, all it can do is it provides you what you want is the information, and then it's the context. If you go back to the different context that you'll be in. And it will enable you to take a different decision.
In the end, it's about choice, isn't it? You're being asked to make a choice, and probably both have good and bad outcomes. You've got to make the best choice that you can believe in. So the data will take you to some point, but then ultimately it becomes often a human choice.
Actually, as an example, so Susan's point about some people that are toxic. Now, I mean, I've been in this situation, and I advise a lot of people. How many times do you sort of say there's someone really toxic, you know they're toxic, and then so you're going to make a move and someone says, oh, yeah, but they're really close to our biggest client. They're really close to the biggest source of revenue. You can't do that. Every single time, take the decision. Right? It's never a right decision that someone toxic. It doesn't matter if it looks as if this is a short-term disastrous for your business. Long-term it's good, and almost always it's never bad in the short term.
Other questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to ask a follow-up to all of that, which is I can't. Oh, yes? Okay.
With the landscape changing so rapidly and platforms and tools coming on an ongoing basis, and also the point that you made about not getting down into the details, how do you really stay up to breast in terms of what's happening, and how do you take advantage of it early?
Okay. Anyone like to?
Well, the point I made about not being in the detail, you absolutely have to, especially in our industry, you've got to be on the edge of what's happening. The difficulty is don't look at the problem from the bottom of the bucket. That's what I would always say. You've got to, as a leader, be able to go big and go deep. And I think that's.
And how are you personally staying in touch?
So I'll take a while. I mean, Luca made a great point, I thought, which is centered around we tend to hire people that are mirrors of ourselves. Statistically, when you look at what you're going to read in the morning, you are statistically much more likely to read things that you know something about. If you're aware of, which makes for a concentric ring of, being myopic over time. If you're aware of that and you intentionally try to read things that you know nothing about, and just think of that, just one filter each time you're thinking about what to look at, you'd be surprised how much those rings broaden. Simple, stupid trick, but it works.
And it makes
I
sense.
specialize in the simple and stupid.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Susan?
I do 2 other things. One, I think you have to be willing to acknowledge what you don't know and to become a beginner again on something. And when I went to Gilt, I can't tell you how many hours I spent with engineers saying, draw the stack for me. And they would all draw it differently because everyone sees what they've built in a somewhat different way. But for me, it was really incredible to just be able to visualize it and to see something as a, not as words, not as code, but as a, the equivalent of a blueprint. And so that was one. The other is I spend as much time as I can with people who are a lot younger than I am. And I find out everything they're reading. I find out the sites they're going to. I have them set me up with various new social networks or new platforms all the time. And I explore.
Another way to do it, I think, is to talk a lot with your clients. Because the privilege of a job like my job is that you don't work just on one industry, but you work with different industries, different people, different geographies. They will talk to you about things which are very relevant to them and you might not know. So a way to just constantly make sure that you look to things in a new way is actually to deal and to listen to clients, to deal with clients, to use clients as a way to learn more.
All right, well, on that note, I'm familiar with the wrap sign being in television, so I'm told to wrap this panel up. Thank you very much to our panelists for a great conversation. Thank you.